Hi, everyone, and welcome to Wildcard Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. So our topic for today is what's new in Geotab Drive and editing logs. So what's new in Geotab Drive is just that, taking a look at some of the features that are new or are going to be rolling out soon. And then we're also going to be taking a look at editing logs. So how you can edit a log, why you would need to edit a log, what the driver needs to do when a log is edited, and we'll show you a demonstration of the workflow. That having been said, I'm going to turn it over to our ELD specialist, Kyle Dodsworth. He's going to present, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks, Ben. So today we're going to, as Ben said, talk about Geotab Drive edits, so hours of service log edits and what's new. I'm going to do the live stuff first. So we're going to do the Geotab Drive edits first, and then we'll talk about what's coming down the pipeline for the release in February. Now, the reason we wanted to talk about hours of service edits inside of Geotab Drive is mostly because there are very specific rules around editing. Not only what can be edited, but also by whom. Also, there's a specific workflow that Ben mentioned about edits. It's not like editing anything else inside of the Geotab system. It's not like where you can just go and add a user or change a user setting and it just takes effect immediately. There's some things that we want to make sure that we cover because we do get questions about how the edits work and why things are looking one way versus another. And I do want to preface all of this with these edits and the way that they work inside of hours of service for ELD come directly from the ELD mandate. So the workflow and the stages and things that can't be edited, that's all directly from the ELD mandate. It's not something that Geotab decided like, hey, let's make it harder for edits to happen. It's actually directly out of the mandate. So from the ELD mandate, from the law, they want, the FMCSA wants a very specific workflow and a very specific kind of process around edits to hours of service. And it does kind of make sense when you think of that because these are like legal documents. They could come up in audit, they could come up in litigation possibly. So that's why there is this big framework around edits. What we're going to talk about, and I'm going to do just a couple slides to get some of the more boring things across, and then we'll go into a couple live systems. First, we're going to talk about what you can edit and why you can edit them. Then we'll talk about the editing and editing logs piece in the live system, either one by one or in a bulk process. And then we'll also flip over and see what the drivers see when you start editing things as well. So first things first, what can be edited? Any part of a manual record of duty status log can be edited. So if you're a driver and you put an edit in to a manual log, you'll be able to change anything. So if you put in that off duty, so you tapped off duty in the app, but then later in the day you realize that you have to move that around or maybe it was supposed to be sleep or birth instead, those are things that you can change as long as it's a manual log. So a manual log refers to an actual person entering it into the system in some way. Now, automatic logs, well, you can also edit automatic logs too, to a certain extent. An automatic log is any time that the system creates the log based on the vehicle movement. So those automatic logs about going into drive and going into on duty when the vehicle starts and stops. Those are what we're talking about here. Those automatic logs, you can still edit them to an extent, but you can't minimize the length of that log. So you can't change the actual time it starts and stops. You can't add a different log in the middle of it. It's very much the time that we're worried about here, and obviously that's pretty important because you don't want that to be editable because then you're opening yourself up to potential issues with litigation and whatnot, like I mentioned. So the only other thing to kind of think about with an automatic log is you can assign them to another driver. So you can move them around in that sense. And this comes into play a lot with unassigned driving. Those are automatic logs, so you can move those around. But you can't change the date and the time, and you can't change a driving log to any other status. That's very important to talk about too for special driving statuses. I'm going to touch on that. So if you have a driver who has the ability to use yard move, and they're driving around in a yard, but they don't toggle yard move on first, you can't change that drive log into a yard move after the fact. Now you can annotate it and you can say that it was a yard move, but for the purposes of hours of service calculations, that counts as a drive and it will always be a drive. That's directly out of the mandate. And I wish we could make an edit there and let people change them when drivers forget to go into yard move before they drive, but we cannot, and it's directly out of the mandate. So make sure any drivers who use yard move or personal conveyance, make sure that before the vehicle is moving, they've gone into the options and selected that special status. And then when you're done with that special status, go back into your options and turn it off. Very important, because otherwise that automatic drive log can't be changed to anything else. And then you can also edit part of a manual non-records of duty status log. And what I mean by that is, you've probably noticed inside of the system, there are some records that appear inside of the log screen when you're looking at it from my Geotab. Things like when you change a rule set or when an exemption is pressed. You can actually edit those as well to a certain extent as well. The one thing to talk about these though is that they're there to help the admin kind of see what's happening. We don't send any of those to the FMCSA. So it's not a very big deal as to the details there. If you do have to edit something, it's for your use only. We're never going to send over a rule set change log to the FMCSA because they didn't have any need for them. It's not part of the mandate. Those types of logs, and I'll have a couple of them that I'll show you, they're there to help the admin. It's just kind of like a little helper log. It's not part of the mandate. We've added them to make it easier when you're inside of the system. So another question that comes up is, can logs be deleted? No. The only logs that are manually added into the system and not part of the ELD mandate can be deleted. So this on this screenshot here is what it looks like when you have a user change their rule set. So this was changing into the Texas interest rate rule set. You'll see there's a remove button. That remove button is there because this is not a log that's part of the ELD mandate. It is one of those helper logs that we add to help the driver and the admin know what was being pressed inside of the app. That's why it's removable. So we do get some questions there of like, hey, I could remove that. How come I can't remove this drive log? Well, that's because the drive log and anything that's ELD mandated can't be removed. It's got to stay in the system. But this, being that it's not part of the ELD mandate, it's one of our helper logs, it can be removed. So if someone changes their rule set by accident, you could just go in here and edit this rule set back to whatever they wanted, but you could also just remove the log entirely, and that's okay, because we were never going to show this to the FMCSA anyway. So those are the two quick slides to talk about before we get into editing logs in the real system. So I'm going to now switch screens a little bit here and jump into my Geotab. So these are my logs for today, and this is a real system. So everything that I just mentioned is going to kind of be shown here. This particular user, they were off duty all the way until this morning. So they did a 34-hour restart, and they had brand new cycles starting up. And you'll see the first two logs are driving on, and then they went off duty after that, and we've been off duty since. At the very top of the screen, we also see one of those helper logs. The rule set changed, so the driver went in and changed their rule set. So I was on Texas Interstate. Now we're back to USA Property. So I'm going to click through these a little bit to show you what they look like and how things can be edited. So I'm going to first look at these two. So these two at the bottom of the screen, if I click into these, this is actually an automatic log. So this is an automatic log. Now we know that because of a couple things. One, it was originally an unassigned driving log, because that's in the origin. So it was an unassigned driver log. All unassigned driver logs are always created automatically. You can also see down here in the modifications, the origin automatic to unassigned tells you that, again, it was an automatic unassigned log. Now, this was a log that the driver picked up when they jumped in the vehicle. Basically, this driver didn't log in, so they had to pick that log up. You'll notice that at the top of the screen, we can't change anything about the duration, and we also can't change any of these date fields either. They're all locked down. That's completely normal because it's an automatic log. But we do have the ability to move it to a different driver, and we also have the ability to update the address and the annotations if we need to. So in this case, when the driver picked up this log, they added an annotation that they said they forgot to log in, which is why it created the unassigned log, but they picked that log back up. and they put the annotation just as a little reminder or helper. Annotations, again, very important. You can never over annotate. Annotations are sent to the FMCSA with the logs, and that could definitely help at a roadside inspection. So always a good idea to add some extra detail and color if you can. You can also see the address is editable, and the driver can be moved as well. It's quite rare that you'd have to move a log from one driver to another, but in some cases, if you have tablets or phones or devices mounted into the vehicles that don't actually travel around with the vehicle and can't be moved, sometimes if a driver doesn't log out when there's a driver switch and the next driver doesn't log in, you may end up with logs that are still logging against driver number 1. You may have to come in and change them over to driver number 2. That is okay to do. Now, there is going to be a small tweak to the workflow coming up in March in the next release into this effect. You'll still be able to change to 2 different drivers. You'll just have to go through an intermediary step, but we'll show that next month. For now, you can actually assign this directly to a different driver if you need to. So you just drop your drop down, and then you can pick a different driver. While I'm on that topic as well, I do want to talk a little bit about driver accounts. In a real ELD system, based on the ELD mandate, every driver account has to be real, has to actually be a real person with a driver's license attached to it. That is basically how the mandate specifies that a real person is going to have that account. It's got to have a driver's license. So you really don't want to have dummy accounts, dummy driver accounts in the system. Again, the system will let you. Of course, you could put in dummy driver account and put in a fake license, but that is something that is not going to be a good thing to pop up in an audit. You definitely wouldn't want to have that happen in an audit, so we don't recommend doing it. Again, the ELD mandate does say that every driver account has to be a real person with a real license assigned to it, so a real driver's license. So I'm not going to edit this particular log. I'm going to go back to the previous screen. And I'm going to then show this log here. So this off-duty log, this one was a manual log. So right away we notice some differences. One, at the date at the top of the screen, it's now editable. So I can move that around. I can change the status as well. And then I can also change everything else that we could on the automatic log. So we can still move to drivers. We can still update the address. We can add annotations. But we can also, on this particular log, we can also change the device as well. Couldn't change the device before because it was an automatic log that was created to a specific vehicle that was an unassigned vehicle. So that we couldn't change before, but now we can on this manual log. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to edit this. So I'm a carrier now, and maybe my driver went into off duty, but realized after the fact that it should have been sleeper berth. So again, they're pretty much one and the same for the purposes of short durations, but maybe this driver really wants to make sure that it's updated to be correct to sleeper berth. So I can drop that down and I can change it over to sleeper berth. Now, every time that you make an edit, you do have to add an annotation. So if I were to try to save this, it gives me a warning and an error. It won't let me save until I add an annotation. So the driver originally put this in because they forgot to log off duty, and then when they put it in wrong, so now I have to fix it. So wrong status was selected. Correct one is sleeper berth. So now when I click save, it'll let me save that. Now, one thing that we get questions on is, wait a minute, I just changed that log from off to sleeper berth. Why is it still showing off? Well, that's because every time that a carrier makes a change to a log of a driver, the driver has full responsibility over that log. So the driver has to accept that edit before it will be reflected in the system. And that is one thing that I really want to hammer home, because if you're correcting a log to get rid of a violation, so maybe some driver, they didn't log their off-duty break. They were on duty for an hour when 30 minutes of it was actually off-duty. Well, if you go in and you add that off-duty log, thinking that's going to get rid of their violation, because maybe they didn't have enough break time to meet their 8-hour on the regular federal rule. If you go in and add that off-duty, it's not going to get rid of the violation until the driver accepts that particular edit. So that workflow is what comes directly out of the ELD mandate. As an admin, you know that this is something that has been edited and is waiting to be verified because it is going to be highlighted in that yellow. And if you click on it, you'll see at the very top of the yellow again, it has a pending edit request. So you can edit it again, and that would be the edit that the driver has to sign off on. But in this case, we're going to leave it as this pending edit request because we're going to jump into the driver in a minute and show what it looks like. So that is what it looks like when you edit for a driver. Now, if you are playing around and testing this as an admin, you might be editing things that are your own logs. Just as a note, if you're testing this or playing around in a non-production environment, or if you're editing your own log inside of the system, it won't actually pend if you are the owner of the actual log. So I'm actually using 2 different user accounts right now. So this Kyle Dosworth here, it's actually a separate account that I created for myself so that it's going to work. But if I try to log my actual admin account logs, it doesn't pend. So keep that in mind as well. And now finally, I'm going to touch on this non-ELD record here. So this rule set change. Again, we can come and change that around. So we can change the date, we can change the rule set, we can even move it to a driver. But again, very rarely would you ever have to touch these or really worry about them a whole lot, because again, they're just there to help the admin know what's going on. We're never going to send this to the FMCSA. FMCSA doesn't really care what rule set the system's on because they only get the raw logs anyway, but this can help an admin to know if their drivers are flipping around. And again, there's that remove button. The remove button doesn't exist when you look at any of the other logs. I'm going to jump into the driver now so that you can see what it looks like from the driver perspective. So immediately, that edit updated for the driver. So this is on the logs page. So there's 2 different places that a driver may come in and accept edits. In this case, the driver was already logged in. The admin made the change, and you see that same yellow appears here, and it's instantaneous. So as soon as that save was done by the admin, the logs update and actually say that you have a pending edit. Now again, you'll see that it still says off, even though we changed it to sleeper burst. So this pending request, and the pending request always bubble to the top, and you click into it, it will then show what changed. So in this case, the status changed from off to sleeper berth. I didn't change anything else, but anything else that I did change would actually show in yellow as well as a requested status. And if I, the driver, think, yeah, this is exactly what I needed, this is perfect, I'd be able to accept or reject. So if I accept, it will then update inside of my logs. There we go. No longer pending. And it also does the same inside of the system. Now, before we leave here, though, I will talk about these pending edits. There is a workflow to the login for pending edits. So if you have pending edits as a driver waiting for you, when you log in to the system, you'll actually get a new screen that interrupts your login to say, hey, you've got pending edits to your logs. Do you want to accept them right now? So that's something that will happen if you do have edits before you log in. If edits happen while you're logged in, they'll be here on your logs, and then they'll also be on the workflow on the log out as well. But let me flip back into regular Geotab, and I'll refresh my screen here. And there's a sleeper berth that has been accepted. And you'll notice too the modifications. We probably haven't talked about modifications a whole lot, but this is like a little mini audit log of what was actually changed. So of course there's the full audit log and the full audit trail inside of system settings for admin users to look at. But if you're just managing just HOS logs, you can always get a little bit of a sense of what's being changed when you look at the modification section at the bottom of the screen. So that's doing a single edit to a driver and seeing what happens on the driver side. Now the other thing that we want to talk about is what happens if you have to make a lot of edits, or you have to do what was called a bulk edit. I'm going to change my view a little bit right now, and I'm going to flip over from this driver. I'm going to go look at my unidentified driving, so all of my unassigned logs. So I just changed my search to unidentified driver. I'll look for today. There's probably a whole bunch today. There we go. So all of these are now unassigned driving. Now, maybe I know that one of my drivers didn't log in at the beginning of the day. So the driver of dispatch 1, they didn't log in at the beginning of the day, so I know that all of these logs are theirs. Let me see if I have any more. There's a lot. So Let me actually go down here and do a lot of edits because I want to show how you can do bulk edits at once. At the top of the screen, on the right-hand side next to your total items is a little drop-down. This is the multi-selection menu. And if you've used this before for editing zones or editing vehicles or editing users, works very much in the same way. So if I drop that down, I can then select visible or select individual. Select visible will just actually select all on the screen. Checkboxes appear. And then select individual means I can go through and pick the individual one. So I'm going to go and grab a whole bunch of logs at the bottom of the day here. So maybe I know that one driver did all the driving for this pickup and for this transit for today. So I'm going to select all 12 of these logs. And this is a pure time-saving play. So once I've selected, this button at the top, Edit Selected HOS Logs, appear. Now, all of the same rules apply to what we were talking about when we're trying to do bulk edits, because you can do bulk edits for an individual driver as well. It's just much trickier though, because if you add, let's say, automatic and manual logs into the same bulk edit, you can't change any of the times on those automatic. So if you're trying to change times, it's not going to work. But if you're trying to do annotations or move them all to a single driver, that'll work. When you click Edit Selected Logs, you can see the things that you can change. So in this case, the most obvious reason that you're going to come here is because you need to assign these to a specific driver. So click on Replace With, that gives you your driver dropdown, and you can go and find your driver and assign to them. So let's just pick someone at random. We'll give them all to Matt. Now, just like the other rules, if I were to go save, it won't let me because we still have to do an annotation. So we'll say Matt forgot to log in today. Make sure you remember to click accept. So a lot of times you'll click the save and then forget to click the accept. It won't actually lock all your changes in. This is basically just a second stage because every once in a while you may edit too much or you may have selected wrong. It's just a second step so that we force the user to confirm that they want to make all these changes because it's multiple times that's it's doing it. So there we go. Those are all changed, and if we scroll down, they're gone now. Now, the other thing that you might do on this screen, just while we're talking about unassigned driving, is maybe all of this driving was done inside of the yard. So that doesn't need to actually be unassigned. So let's go in and we'll select individual again, and we'll grab these 4 logs. Because they're unassigned driving, you may just be able to annotate them away. So this is known as, let's say, a yard move. Once we save, they're still going to be there under unassigned driving, but now they're not in that red shade because we've annotated, which means the next person who jumps into this dispatch 1, they're not going to be notified that there's unassigned driving that they have to worry about. So it gets rid of that from the workflow. And this is, again, perfectly fine within the mandate. As long as you annotate your unassigned driving or assign it to an actual person, it will remove those logs out of the workflow for that particular vehicle. And you do want to keep a good handle on this because if you have too much unassigned driving on a vehicle, it will actually pop up as a malfunction and show up on your roadside inspections. Not a good thing to have a lot of unassigned driving because the whole reason for this mandate is to track the driving time. So if you have a lot of time where there's no human behind the wheel, that's going to raise some eyebrows for the FMCSA. So that's editing logs in bulk. Now you can, as I said, do that for any other user as well. So maybe I wanted to go back into my Kyle user. So I do have the option, the multi-select again. I can select visible and I can add. Want to add a log as well? So I'm going to do this as the last piece of the live demo part. I'm going to add a log for this particular user that's a manual log. So they've been in the sleeper berth since this morning, and I'm going to say that they are now on duty. So let's say they're going to be on duty, and we'll put them on at 1 p.m. Flip them over into on. automatically knows the driver. Now, in this case, it doesn't know the device because the last time that we updated them, they didn't have a device, so I can then put them into a specific device. I can even add co-drivers, I can update the address, and then I can add my annotation because I have to. So let's say driver forgot to log in again. Now, as soon as we click save, you can't create an HOS log in the future. So that's something that is obviously important as well. So in this case, the reason that it's doing this is because the driver's time zone is different from yours. Now, this is something that's important to watch out for as well when drivers are in different time zones, is you might get this error and you're wondering what the heck are you talking about because the driver's in a different time zone. So watch out for that. It's something that we do get questions on quite a bit as well. So we could go and move this back into an earlier time and it should work next time. There we go. So now they're on duty. Again, it's in yellow. And if I were to jump over into Geotab Drive, it automatically pops up again for the driver, and the driver can accept it. So that's about all we wanted to talk about with edits. Hopefully that'll help a little bit more about cleaning up logs and moving things around. It is a necessary evil right now that your drivers are probably going to have some edits that you need to make. They're going to be making edits. And again, edits are perfectly fine. Edits are not a bad thing. If you think back to before December when we had paper logs, you could just do your logs in pencil and then erase things. That was perfectly fine too. No one's perfect. That's why we can make these edits, but there is that caveat that if you do make an edit for a driver, they have to accept it because they have responsibility, and you can't shorten any automatic time. Those are the two biggest things that we get questions on. Both of those directly out of the mandate, so not much that we can really change there. But hopefully this will help a little bit, getting this a little bit easier for admin users. Alrighty, so now let's flip over into the what's new. And I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions about edits that we'll get to. But maybe I should also ask, Ben, did you want to tackle any pressing edit-based questions now before we do the what's new piece, just so that we get them kind of front of mind?
Yeah, so there was actually a great question that came through that I wanted to address to the group. And the question was, how do we handle situations where a system issue causes the drive log to extend indefinitely and we are not able to correct?
So we've seen that very rare, but in some cases, there's an automatic log that gets basically stuck. So it's an automatic log. Maybe it's because we didn't get the ignition off from the vehicle. Maybe the vehicle is over-reporting some type of engine data. So it's keeping the vehicle, quote unquote, in motion, even though it's actually stopped. The reason that might happen is because the ELD mandate actually specifies the data that we have to use to determine whether the vehicle is start or stopped. It's actually not GPS data, as you would kind of think. So even though our system on the trip knows that the vehicle is stopped, if the vehicle is still reporting the information that the ELD mandate is looking for to determine if the vehicle is moving, it still has to look like it's moving. So in those cases, the best option is to definitely contact your support mechanism, and it may be something that comes up to Geotab to look into, but it's almost always something to do with a funky piece of engine data behind the scenes. So not something that we can fix immediately, but it is something that we're used to seeing when we do see it. There's sort of telltale signs. But that's one of the more common cases where I've seen a drive log just kind of persist, and you can't do anything about it because it's automatic. In those cases, we have to dig a little bit deeper.
Sure, great. The other thing, and I just want to reiterate sort of something that you said, is at least with the driver side of editing logs, something to keep in mind is that it's really baked into the workflow. If the driver logs in, they're going to get to a point where they have to address edited logs, and they're not going to be able to proceed without either accepting or rejecting any edits. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's not something that the driver is going to have to go out of their way to do. The app is automatically going to present it to them, and they'll have to deal with those edits. I think those are the pressing edit questions for now. So if you want to move on to the what's new.
Alrighty. Okay, so there is quite a large list of what's new for February. We pushed a lot from December into the February release, so this should be rolling out fairly shortly. So lots of actually cool stuff. This is actually I know the last time I did this, it was kind of like boring back end type of things. There's some really new features coming down the pipeline, which we've been looking forward to. This is all a function of the fact that now that the mandate is behind us, the ELD team here at Geotab can now actually look at what can we do to actually make the driver's life easier, the admin life easier. Where are the areas of opportunity that we know that are still within the mandate that we can then tweak and make better. So that's kind of where we are now, is we don't have to worry so much about getting everything right for the mandate, because that's behind us. We can now look at some more of the fun stuff that Geotab Drive could do. There are some improvements and changes to things that you might be used to, so we'll cover some of those first. We've constantly tried to make login time faster, because there are so many different things that a driver has to do when they log in. We're trying to improve that just so that it's doing downloads faster and it's updating faster. One thing that we did as a big change is, if anyone had been driving around in their vehicle with Geotab Drive open, so the app was open sitting on the login screen, but you hadn't logged in yet, and your volume was on, it would actually start yelling at you. It would audibly say, please stop driving and log in. Now that is something that we removed. It will still pop up on the screen to say that you should log in, but it's not going to yell at you and tell you to log in. That was something that we removed. We're also trying to move more and more as we can into the cloud. That's just improvements in general. We're also tweaking the logic to the DVIR pre and post trip information. So now if you do a short trip, it actually won't count as a trip for the DVIR to be compared to. So we had some cases where you would drive the truck from where it was parked overnight into a shed or a nice heated area for those who are driving around in the winter, and do a DVIR in that nice heated area. Our old logic sometimes would actually say that DVIR was a post trip because your trip of 500 feet counted as a trip. So that will no longer happen. We're constantly trying to improve this logic as well, and we'll probably have some more things being added to this logic for next month that we'll talk about next month to make it even better and easier to use. Malfunctions and data diagnostics, they actually take up less room on the screen now. So they're still going to be up at the top of the screen. So you'll see here on the red bar, we have a malfunction. That will still be there, but it's a little bit smaller, as well as the yellow and red are still there. So if you have a data diagnostic, that's going to be yellow. If it's a malfunction or a malfunction and a data diagnostic, it's going to be red. Big thing here is it's just a lot smaller, so it takes up about half the amount of space as it used to. So now we can put more information on the screen. Now, where we removed one Audible Alert, we added a new one. So this one's actually pretty cool. Now when you have the notification that you're almost out of hours of service at 2 hours, 1 hour, 30 minutes, if your phone has the volume on, it will now speak that to you as well. Now, if you're in off-duty or sleeper berth, it doesn't occur because the mandate says it shouldn't. But if you're driving along now and you get to that 2 hour mark, it will actually speak that out to you. Just as a note for everybody listening, if you're testing this out on the bench or at your desk, don't leave the Drive app open and on duty when you go to bed, because then it's going to yell at you in the middle of the night and scare the pants off of you. That actually happened to me, but it is really useful for, obviously, for drivers who are driving along. They no longer have to take their eyes off the screen to see that notification. It will actually warn them verbally that they're getting close to a driving limit. So that's a really nice one. Waiting a little while to add that, and it works very, very well. Just, again, make sure if you're testing this out, turn off your volume before you go to bed, because the system's still gonna warn you. Another change that isn't a huge one, when you claim unassigned logs, if you have an on and a drive that were kind of paired together, so that they were created together. So the vehicle moved, that created the drive, and then it stopped, that created the on duty. When you claim the drive, it'll also claim the on duty as well. So they come in together. You don't have to select them both individually. They'll actually pair automatically. And that makes sense, because if you were driving and then stopped, you would have to be on duty. So it's going to grab that on duty that comes with the drive. And again, that's just to make sure that it's one less button click that a driver has to do. So some of the more fun things, well, this one's actually not so fun, but we had to add it in. There is now a EULA for drivers. So that's an end user agreement or an end user license agreement. The first time that you log in, you'll have to accept or decline this, kind of standard for most software items out there, but we had to add one for legal purposes. But let's get to some more fun stuff. Now, this is a new feature, something that we've been working on for a little while. It now marries Dvir defect information and our rule engine. So this is outside of the ELD realm entirely. This is one of those things that we could go into and add because it was a neat feature that our system could do. So now what you can write is you can go into your rule engine, and under your more settings will be a Dvir defect option. So you could add that as one of your conditions inside of your rule. So that way, it could be as simple as that. It could be that every time that there's a Dvir defect, I want the rule to create an exception. And then you could add notifications on that to send emails to your maintenance team or whoever needs to know that there was a defect that was created. Maybe you want to add some extra conditions to that. Maybe you want to add a zone to it. So maybe you want to say that if there is a defect in this particular zone in the yard, well, that has to be an email that goes over to the maintenance people who work at the yard. But if there's a DVIR done outside of the yard, that has to go to our third-party maintenance team because they travel around and fix the vehicles out on the road. So this is something that we're going to be adding to. We're going to add more hours of service and more DVIR information into the rules engine. This is the first step. It is only going to be visible if you have feature preview on. So once the February release is on your database, make sure that if you want to see this, go into your user options and turn feature preview on. For anyone who's using Purge or the Canadian rule sets, those are all under feature preview anyway, so it's probably on for most people anyway. But just a note, if you don't see this DVIR defect in your more settings in your exception rule edit, make sure that feature preview is turned on in your user setting. One of my favorite ones, one that we actually had enabled when Drive first came out about a year and a half, 2 years ago during the mandate, was this one. This is text messages sent down to the driver's device on those exception notifications. So this is a form of driver feedback, and I've been asked for this for quite a bit. A really good example is a speeding rule. So most people who use Geotab Drive, if they're only looking at Drive, the rules and what we just talked about there might be foreign to you. But on my Geotab, you can write rules on anything that the vehicle is doing. Big one being speeding. So you could actually have a dynamic rule written to say if the vehicle travels 10 miles an hour over the posted speed limit, send a note down into Geotab Drive. So send a text message down to Geotab Drive saying, hey, please slow down, you've just broken this rule, or you're going too fast. What's really neat about this is it comes up as a notification inside of Geotab Drive, but if the device has text-to-speech, which almost all devices, especially Android devices, have, it will actually take that notification and convert it into speech and actually speak it out to the driver. So this is very similar for anyone who's been using Geotab for a few years or knows about some of our extra hardware add-ons. We have one called Go Talk, which allows you to do this with a third-party hardware. This is basically Go Talk using the driver's device, meaning it doesn't cost you anything to enable. So it's a really, really neat feature, and you can use it really in any kind of way that you can think of. Write that text message out. You can create custom ones. Have it sent down to the device that the driver is signed in with, and that's going to be much more effective than using the device beeping or after the fact finding out they broke the rule and having to coach them the next day, that type of thing. So this is something we're really excited to re-enable. The reason that we had to remove it for the last little while is just to make sure that we had a good handle on the notifications and they're reliable. We anticipate a lot of people are going to be using this, so we wanted to make it as rock solid as we can. This one's not a huge one, but just a little point. If a vehicle is taken from you by another driver, so let's say if you forgot to log out at the end of your shift, and the next vehicle or the next driver jumped in that vehicle and signed in, grabbed that vehicle, you're going to get a little pop-up that says that you no longer have a vehicle assigned to you. That's pretty normal in that case, but if someone grabs your vehicle while you are driving it, that could potentially happen, that they accidentally tap the wrong vehicle. You're going to get this note pop up, and you'll want to go and select the vehicle again. This works for both drivers and co-drivers, so it's a slightly different screen depending on whether you're looking at the driver or the co-driver, but we want to add this just to make sure that drivers are aware that the vehicle was being taken by a different driver in the system. This one, you might have seen this if you have vehicles that are driving close to borders. Part of the mandate says that you have to put the address or the city on each of these logs based on where they're closest to. So which city with 5,000 people or more. What we were noticing sometimes is that if a U.S. driver was close to the Canadian border or sometimes even Mexican border, they would end up getting Canadian or Mexican addresses because that's how they were closer to that. What we've basically done is removed that. So now if you are operating in an American rule set, so the federal 60 or 70 hour or any of the American rule sets we have, you'll only ever see American addresses, even if you are close to a border, and vice versa. And this is just to make sure we clarify everything. Basically, in American rule sets, you got to have U.S. addresses based on the mandate, and vice versa. So this is a little piece to clarify that. If you don't have any drivers running near a border, you would have never seen it, and this doesn't really impact you, but it was a small change. One of the malfunctions that the system must look for is if the storage limit is reached. Now, our devices, I don't think you'd ever see this. Now, it is mandated, so we have to have this as a malfunction. The fact that our devices, they hold at least a month's worth of driving, and we've seen them go even further than that. I don't think we're ever going to run out of room on the device, because every time that it communicates through the cloud, it's getting more space. It's pushing everything up into the cloud and removing them from its own memory. But if you do see this, if you do see this as a malfunction, it means that either A, your driver is operating outside of cellular coverage for a very long time, or B, there's an actual failure of the memory inside of the device, which is much more rare. So I don't think you'll actually see this malfunction a lot, but it is one that we recently added. Again, we don't think you're going to see it, but if you do, treat it like a regular malfunction, switch over to paper, check with your support arm to get this fixed. We have also made a small tweak to the name and address on the compliance print. Before, it would show the company name and address that you have inside of my Geotab by default. Now it only does that if you don't actually put an authority name and address on that particular user's information. So inside of the hours of service tab for each user, you can put the terminal information and the authority information. If you don't fill out the authority information there, we'll grab it off of the company name and address from the system settings of your database. But we wanted to make sure that if it was there on the user, that it overrides anything that might be in the company name and address. Again, just in the name of trying to be as transparent as we can and getting the best information we can onto the compliance print. And again, this is just for the compliance print. If you can't do an email or a web transfer at roadside, you'd be using the compliance print. Just a small update there to make sure that it had the right information. It also does that inside of my Geotab as well. So that's where it shows. So if you've ever done a compliance print from my Geotab for your record keeping, it also does the same thing here. A name change to one of the features inside of hours of service rules and the rule sets is the 24-hour restart. So if you've ever used the oil field exemptions, and anyone who does oil would probably know this, that oil use, or I guess oil transport, those specially trained drivers in special vehicles get a couple extra exemptions. So we didn't have them named very nicely inside of my Geotab, so we've updated that. The 24-hour restart, that's actually the new name for the oil equipment transport operation. 24-hour restart, the reason we did this is because it's used in more than just oil. It's used in construction and some other industries as well. So now what you can do, if you need to use that for your driver, you can come in and toggle that to on, and they will now be able to restart their cycle after 24 hours instead of 34. The one below that, oil wait time and 24-hour restart, we tweaked the name of that one as well because it used to just say wait at well, but it actually included 24-hour restart as well, and it wasn't that clear. So we renamed that. So if you do need the wait at well and 24-hour restart, that's toggle one. You don't have to add both. Now, some people might question, well, what if you only need the oil wait time? Well, if you're doing the oil wait time, you get the 24-hour as well. Now, there may be some cases where you might have some fleets out there that want to be very strict and use the oil wait time, but still have a 34-hour restart. We should have a solution for you in the coming months with a new tool that we're using to build custom rule sets. But I haven't really heard of many people who want oil wait time and a 34-hour restart. Most times the 24-hour restart is quite advantageous. So a couple little name changes here, purely just to make it easier for admins to set up their drivers correctly. But functionality is the same as it was before. It just now makes a little more sense when you look at it. The compliance report shows 8 days worth of logs. This is a mandate piece. Before it was sending possibly one extra day, so we've tweaked that to make sure that it only shows the information that is required for the officer. We don't want to give any extra information over to the officer at all. No vehicle is an option when you add logs as well. This is something that's new. So before, if you added a log, you had to always add a vehicle, and no vehicle wasn't an option, which made it difficult sometimes to add in some of your on and off duties when you were not actually driving. So we've now made it so that no vehicle is an option. You don't have to always choose a vehicle. We've also changed reporting for hours of service logs. And there are two big changes here. One is you can now run reports by driver or unidentified driver. And this is pretty huge because we know that a lot of companies want to have a nice report come out once a day or once a week that shows all of the unidentified driving so that you know if you need to jump in and get rid of them, annotate them, that type of thing. So now you can actually create an HOS log report and toggle it to unidentified. That's the toggle at the bottom of the screen. You can also now automatically filter the report when it gets generated by statuses. So you can filter out or in certain things. So if you only want to see login and logout activity, you can do that. If you only want to see certification of records, but more importantly, the one that I like is that now you can actually see regular statuses versus exemption ones. So you can actually say that I only want to see the regular ones like on and off and sleeper berths, things like that. Or do you want to see the exemption one? So it's a lot easier to now create reports just on exemption use. And we'll actually be using a couple of these in some new marketplace reports that we'll be releasing soon. So that'll probably be in the next what's new is we'll have those on the marketplace. But until then, if you don't want to wait for the marketplace reports, you're free to jump in and maybe add some of these filters to the reports you are currently using. It's just a lot easier to use these filters natively with the report builder tool instead of having to do it on the actual Excel template. On that note too, I wanted to talk about some add-ins that were coming down the pipeline as well. So add-ins are extra little pieces, little snippets of code that we can add into the system to make it easier. If you're familiar with our compliance guide for hours of service, you'll know that we have a bunch of them already in the system to switch rule sets really easily, and there's new ones coming down the pipeline. Now, one add-in that we're going to be releasing very shortly is a way to do an ELD transfer from my Geotab. And this is actually something that we've been able to do since the mandate came down. We just had to use our API tool. We've created a nice, pretty interface. This is so that if you have to send logs into the FMCSA, like maybe you're doing like a safety upgrade or something like that, they request, okay, well, send me this driver's log, for last month. You'd be able to use that tool to do that. We're also going to have an add-in for admins to import hours of service logs from Excel. This is going to be really important if drivers are moving between different companies that use different versions of the ELD solutions. Because ELDs aren't interoperable, the FMCSA decided not to enforce that. As long as you can get an Excel output of logs from the driver, you can then import them easily into the system. That might help a lot if drivers are switching back and forth between different companies. And we're also releasing an ELD data checker. What this will do is you can add it into your system and easily see if you've forgotten to add any important information to a driver or a vehicle. So if you've been using Drive for a little while and sending transfers in, you know if there's a VIN missing or if you've forgotten a DOT number for a driver, it'll give you an error because the FMCSA needs that information. This little add-in will actually show you where those missing pieces are before you find out when you're trying to do a transfer at roadside. So that's a really neat one that'll be coming down the pipeline. And another one is on the topic of edits. If you have a lot of edits as a driver, you have to go into each one individually. So we're going to create an add-in that shows all of the edits at once and lets the driver accept all at once with one button click. So if you send them 5 edits, they don't have to tap 5 times, you just have to tap once. It'll also let you edit further back than what the mandate actually mandates. So by default, the system only needs to show you the last 14 days, but we're going to have this particular add-in let you go even further back. So if you notice, a month after the fact that a driver did something that you have to fix, you don't have to print that out and get them to sign it, which is what some other ELDs make you do because you can't do an edit that far back. With this tool, you'll be able to do an actual edit in the regular way, and it'll pop up in this little add-in for the driver, even if it's further than 14 days ago. So that's a nice little tool. So all these will be coming down the pipeline soon. We'll probably be able to talk more about these next month, add them into the compliance guide on the marketplace, that type of thing. But we're excited about these because it's, again, ways to make your life easier. That's what these are all about. Alrighty, and that is all that I've got. We probably have time for a little, probably like 5 or 10 minutes worth of questions if you got any, Ben.
Yes, one question that came up was one about verifying drivers logging out of the app. Would you mind jumping into the audit log real quick and showing us how users can do that?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that you can do that. Let me actually go into this user and log out so that we have a record right away. I also have to accept a log that I put in earlier. There we go. So I'll log out. I'm just going to skip most of this. There we go. So that driver just logged out. And if we go back into administration, system, audit log, that's exactly what it looks like right there. But it also creates an HOS log as well. So there's 2 different things at play here. One is Geotab. So my Geotab and the Geotab audit log captures it because we just capture everything. We capture as much as we possibly can. You can see some of the other things that we were playing around with here. Those were all done during this presentation. But if you actually go into your HOS logs and you toggle on these 2 options to include system logs is the important one here, then you're going to actually be able to see the log off, the log in here as well. So I went in and out a little bit this morning, there we go, but that's the log off that we just did. And again, time zone difference, that's why it's showing at 10:56 because the time zone for this particular driver is, I guess that is Mountain. So that also creates here as well. So you could run reports off of either or. I would say running a report off of this particular HOS screen is much easier now because you can filter for just log in, log off events. And then what you can do is you can write a quick little Excel script or Excel calculation to look for matching logins and logs offs. So if you don't see a login, log off, log in, log off, if you just see a log in but no log off for a driver, you can flag that and have that be something that pops up on an email notification. So 2 different ways that you can see log offs in the system. I like this one a little bit better. It's a little cleaner.
Great. Well, thank you for showing that, Kyle. And we're actually out of time and we need to wrap it up here. So thank you to everyone for taking some time out of your day and joining us. You'll receive a request for feedback on today's webinar, and we appreciate any that you have to give. So thank you again for joining us. Kyle, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day and educating us on editing logs and what's coming up in Geotab Drive.
No worries, guys. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Take care.